fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alpstead, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Greetings, Hawk fans. Welcome in to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I am Keith Myers. Bill is out this week, and filling in for him is the one and only Dan Viennes of the Emerald City Sportscast. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, man. It's good to be back, and it's fun. It's fun to be on and get to talk about some Seahawks. I haven't done my own show in about 4 or 5 weeks, so I'm raring to go, man.
Yeah, that means you've got lots of thoughts and opinions all saved up for us. So let's kind of just jump into it. This is a fun game. This next first win in what feels like about a year and a half. And okay, it hasn't been that long. It's been a month, but it's been quite some time since they've won a game, and they came out and they won this one pretty handily. Yeah,
and from the very beginning, it was just. Regardless of how the game was going to turn out, and this is something that I think I've tried to do this season is try to let go of the outcome a little bit and just enjoy week to week. But they've been playing such a boring brand of football for the last 6 weeks that this game right out of the gate, whether they won or lost, it was entertaining as heck. And we haven't seen enough of that. And maybe it's because they were 3-8. And on the outside looking in the playoff race, and Pete even had some comments today about how, this kind of felt like the kind of game to go for it, which we can dissect that later. But the bottom line is maybe desperation is a good thing sometimes, because from a fan's perspective, yesterday's game was a lot of fun to watch.
Well, it kind of just starts up right up on the second drive. I mean, the first two drives were both 3 and out. And as I was telling you, before we hit record, of the first 6 plays, 4 of them were wide receiver screens that went nowhere, which I thought was really weird play calling. But at least it was getting the ball into the hands of Metcalf and Lockett, and something that they've just haven't made that emphasis on. And then they came out and said, no, we are going to get the hands into our playmakers, even if it's not something that's going to work right away. And I think it paid off. But after that, the second 3 and out, to do the fake punt and have Travis Homer, take that almost the length of the field, that was fun. And it's like, where has that been with Pete Carroll? Like, he hasn't done that kind of stuff since, 2011, 2012. That's just kind of gone from his repertoire ever since then.
Yeah, and there were so many layers to that play and that play call, because to hear it afterwards, Homer said that's an audible, that's a call that he had available to him if they had a 6-man box on the punt coverage team, and he saw it right off the bat. He said he didn't think it was going to happen that soon, and so he called it. And so not just the fake punt itself, but the fact that Pete Carroll and his coaching staff gave him that freedom to make that call is kind of un-Pete Carroll-like. And it seems, I think there's a bigger discussion here about how the better this team is, and the more important the game is, and the more that's riding on each game, the more he's going to tend to be conservative. And so right off the bat, it just sent a message that, hey, anything can happen today. And I think it was an important message, not to the fans, to the 49ers. And you're talking about those first 2 drives too. It was interesting. I kind of had flashbacks on that first drive. I thought I was back at Washington State University watching Dennis Erickson call a game, because he would do that. And I joke, but it's, even though, like you said, you made the point that none of those plays went anywhere. They didn't really result in positive yardage. But they kind of set things up for later. And I know Waldron likes to script his plays. Erickson would do that a lot. He'd come out in the first drive and he'd throw at least one wide receiver screen to the right sideline, one to the left sideline. Early on in his script, he would hit so many different areas of the field and really kind of, A, you're testing the defense, but B, you're sending the message right off the bat that, like, look, you're going to have to defend the whole field against us. And I thought, as far as getting guys involved, like you said, getting guys touches, because frankly, that's been my biggest complaint of what we've seen from Shane Waldron so far, is not play calling. I think sometimes that tends to be the easy, lazy analysis to fall back on, but it's personnel usage. In the NFL, which is a player-driven league and a star-driven league, it's not so much about the actual play you call. It's about getting guys involved and using their strengths and making the most of those. And I thought right off the bat, they sent that message, and then we continued to see it. And this was the important thing throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah. I mean, that point you make was early in the year when the defense was really struggling. Coming after just going into the first 49er game when the defense was just getting run over. Bill and I had that same conversation about you've got guys like Jamal Adams that have some tremendous skill sets if you use them. And instead they were playing him in an area that doesn't take advantage of his skills and instead made him kind of play to his weaknesses, which is, being a deep safety and trying to do that. And it's like, why are you moving away from what your players do best? And it felt like you're right. The offense had kind of been doing that a little bit the last couple of weeks, especially when you got a guy like DK Metcalf, and it's not until the fourth quarter that he gets his first target. Yeah. Like, that's absurd. And so in this game, for them to go out and play to their players' strengths, I thought it was a nice thing to see. It was good to see them get the ball to DK, get the ball to Lockett, try some things and just kind of be more creative. It was definitely a more fun brand of football to watch.
Yeah, and even aside from that, they didn't get away from their intention to be balanced. They didn't get away from their plan. And we've seen that too many times this year. They'll come out in the first two series, the offense will be ineffective, couple 3-and-outs. And then it just seemed like, especially the 4 weeks since Russ has been back, they just kind of would scrap whatever game plan they had and just try to find explosive plays down the field. Mm-hmm. In this game, even with Chris Carson out for the season, Alex Collins not playing in this game, Adrian Peterson showing up on Tuesday, Rashad Penny battling injuries again as he has all year long, and a lot of uncertainty in the backfield. They stuck with the running game, even though it wasn't wildly successful. I think both those guys ran it. I think they had 21 carries between them, and for 51 70 yards. Something yards. Yeah, Penny averaged 3.5, and Peterson averaged 1.6 or 7. And
yeah, but
they stuck with it enough that it kept the 49ers. They had to respect the running game at least. I thought since the opener, and since the opener against Indy, which we all agree was the best offensive game they've had this year, if you don't count the Jaguars game, I thought it was Shane Waldron's best performance and best execution of a game plan, and maybe we saw for the first time kind of what he wants to do when the offense is a little bit more effective.
Yeah. The other thing that I think that it kind of gets lost because people look at this and they go, okay, well, a one touchdown win, the 49ers were down on like the 3-yard line at the end of the game. It could very easily could have gone the other way. You also have to take into account that, Everett had probably his worst game as a pro, and with three turnovers, and
that's brutal.
One of which led on the next play to a Jimmy Garoppolo touchdown pass, and the other two were coughed up on the goal line. It's like 21-point swing all on one player.
Just on him, yeah. Absolutely.
This game felt like more of a blowout than the score ended up being, which is kind of weird. And then especially when you look at early in the game where, the 49ers had a 17-7 lead at one point. And then after that, it was just all Seattle. Even with the turnovers and everything, it was all Seattle until that very last drive. And even then, they couldn't punch it in. So it was kind of a good thing to see this team come out and just outplay a team for a change.
Yeah, and for all the positive signs that we think we've seen over the last 4 or 5 weeks, even with the offense struggling, but from the defense, and this plays into how frustrating the season's been, that once the defense got fixed, it's really been consistent against good teams. And this is another example. The Niners came in here hot. When we played them in week 4, it wasn't a big surprise when we went down there and beat them. They hadn't really put some things together yet, and they had some injuries they were battling. They came in here hot. They won 3 straight, I think, and and they were effective, and they were using all their personnel, and Garoppolo was playing well, and their running game was effective. And that's the thing about the Niners is you talk about Shanahan and his capabilities as a play caller and as an offensive head coach. And it's not that he has a wide open, crazy passing game. It's all built around the running game.
Mm-hmm.
And the Seahawks completely bottled that up. And that's been a consistent trait over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And, we can talk later about the bigger picture and what that means moving forward, because this season is, what it is. But they've found something there. And that gives them a chance to win every game that they're in. And you look at the rest of the schedule now, and I still tend to think that maybe what we saw yesterday, that they might have difficulty repeating that. Like, if we can see that offense again the next few weeks, then maybe we're onto something. But that defense gives them a chance every week. And who would have thought we could even make that statement after, week 1, 2, and 3 and everything that happened there?
Well, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the way the offense played, it was really rough early in the game. A lot of sacks. The first 2 drives, Russ was just getting crushed before he could even get to the top of his drop. And then they made a couple changes. They benched. At least I was at the game, so I don't know if he got hurt or not. But from at the game, it seemed like they benched Shell at right tackle and brought in Stone Forsythe.
They said his shoulder was acting up again, and they're not sure where that's at. Yeah.
Okay, because that's from where we were. He didn't go down. There wasn't a problem. It was just all of a sudden, it's like he gave up a sack, and then the next series he wasn't in there. And Forsythe was in there, and that really kind of. He didn't play like spectacularly, but he was much more steady. And then later in the game, they finally benched Fuller, which I can't believe he was even out there playing, given how bad he's been all year. But they finally benched him, and they brought in Jake Curran, who's actually a tackle. And he was playing at left guard, especially at the end of the game when they had that 6-minute drive and they marched down the field and ended up fumbling at the 1 with Everett. But they just ate that entire fourth quarter, a huge chunk of it. It was with the 2 rookies on the offensive line, and suddenly they could run the ball, and Russ had time, and just things started to click. And it's like, hey, well, they might be onto something with letting these kids play instead of running out these ineffective veterans.
Yeah, and I always like to get your thoughts on the offensive line, because I know that's an area that you really pay attention to and kind of your specialty. And early on, I don't think I actually tweeted it. I thought about tweeting it, but essentially my thought early in this game was, if you have Ethan Posick and Kyle Fuller playing next to each other, you don't have a chance. It was so bad. As much as we all talked about, you, Bill, and I, earlier this season, how we thought that this might have been their best offensive line group they've put together in the last few years after the trade for Gabe Jackson. They were terrible. They were terrible. And on top of that, then we can have a discussion about Dwayne Brown and what he has left in the tank and his struggles. And so that entire left side was just getting manhandled. And then I was really encouraged to see Curran come in, although I question, Phil Haynes was active. Was he not?
Yeah.
Wasn't he the superstar of training camp? Weren't they raving about how great he looked in training camp? Anyway.
Well, they were, but at the same time, he didn't make the initial squad.
And they had to bring him back in the practice squad.
He got cut, went to the practice squad. He's bounced, back and forth. And so clearly, despite them raving about him, he wasn't that good. But, getting Curran in there, he's a rookie. And he's a guy that actually played really well in the preseason. He has only played a few snaps over the course of the season, and they weren't great at right tackle, but at least, he's only played like a handful of snaps. But he came in, and there were some plays where he was just mauling guys and just driving them off the ball, and that was great to see.
Yeah, and we talked about him a lot at the beginning of the season. He was a guy that they thought played well enough that if they had exposed him to waivers, they wouldn't have gotten him back. Mm-hmm. And so they protected him on the 53. And I thought that was a smart move, because I think there's a really good chance with Brandon Shell's contract up at the end of this year. And you can talk about Shell's performance. I think for the most part, he's passable at right tackle, or serviceable might be a better word, but he can't stay healthy. He's always nicked up. And I think Jake Curran could be your starting right tackle next year. So to see him in at guard was interesting. And there were some plays, and you said you hadn't done a full rewatch yet. When you do, you'll see this. There's a couple plays he got blasted. Not blasted physically straight on, but where some stunts and twists really got him. There was one where Eric Armstead kind of looped inside and just absolutely beat him and blew up the play, and it resulted in a sack. But pass protection, he was really good. It seemed like he's a guy that seems to have really good vision, and his head's always on a swivel, and he uses his hands to hold guys off. He doesn't just overly commit and pick a guy to block and go that way. So you might be right. There might be something there that sort of by default or by accident we stumble onto that. And then Forsythe, if the kind of the sick, twisted behind the scenes Seahawk fan in me, I never wish injury on anybody, but I kind of hope he has to play this week because I really want to see, especially against a team like Houston, I really want to see what he can do, because we all thought when he was drafted, the scouting report on him was needs work as a run blocker, but could start today as a pass blocker in the NFL. Yep. And he projects more on the left side. We could be looking at, there was a moment there where Curran and Forsythe were in the game at the same time. Those could be the bookends next year unless they invest in that position. So it's really fun to watch. And that's the weird part about a season like this, is I want to see more stuff like that. I really, at this point, look, the odds of them making the playoffs and making a run are I think they improved literally from 2% to 3% with that win. Saw that this morning. That's the actual statistic on that. So at this point, I want to see guys. I want to see guys play, and that includes a running back that I want to see get some touches too. But that was fun to watch. That was a fun part of the game for me.
Yeah, and so like I said, I haven't gone back and rewatched the game. I was at the game. You can only evaluate so much from the 300 level. But actually, it was. I did notice when guys came out and that kind of stuff, and when the guys came in, and then the success the running game had after that. But from where we were sitting, the better part I thought was just watching the way the routes developed, because being able to because I was kind of like behind the play when from the perspective of in the fourth quarter as the Seahawks are going down it, and so there's a lot of running plays. But when they had to throw it, just watching the way the spacing was, and I felt like in this game more so than in the last couple, they've done a better job of forcing teams to defend the entire width of the field, not just getting guys deep and pushing the safeties back, but also pulling the linebackers and the cornerbacks wide. And that just opened things up in the middle and allowed especially Penny there in the fourth quarter to have some opportunities to just run and do his thing. So that was actually kind of cool to see them that that felt like an adjustment after the last couple of weeks. That really made teams defend, or really made the 49ers defend the width of the field, not just the depth. So that was kind of nice.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because that was one of the real criticisms in the past of our offensive coordinators. There was the famous moment where, Darrell Bevell was criticized greatly for simplistic route concepts and archaic route concepts. And Doug Baldwin came out in his defense, and Schottenheimer, I think, faced similar criticism. But I do see that from time to time. So it's interesting to hear you say that about what you saw in the game yesterday is we see more complex routes from Shane Waldron. I think more, guys kind of faking on a slant and then stopping and kind of leaking back outside, things like that, especially against man coverage. And so that was fun. And then we talked about personnel usage and how they got Metcalf and Lockett involved. We finally saw D. Eskridge be part of the game plan and get involved and be out there every play. He had a touchdown. Had a couple nice plays,
3 catches on 3 targets and a touchdown. Yeah,
really looked like you could see just a glimmer of why they drafted him and what he could look like, and that was fun to see. I think I still hold out hope. I think he's a fun player.
Oh, his skill set's going to be fun. It's really just unfortunate. He had that injury in training camp, and then he had that concussion, which just lingered for weeks and weeks, and he had to go see a specialist and all of that. But to have him finally back and finally playing, he's fun. Like does he necessarily make the team significantly better at this point? I don't think so. But he certainly is fun. And you're 4-8. Give me all the fun I can get, right? So
yeah. And I think about him this way. We've seen moments where all the attention's on Lockett and Metcalf, and we'll see Freddie Swain make a play.
Mm-hmm.
And now if Eskridge can take that role, that number 3 role, like he's so much more dynamic than Freddie Swain. And so even if all you did was give him his touches, he's the kind of guy that you better not forget about him or he's going to burn you. And we're going to see some explosive plays out of him. That touchdown was kind of wasn't exactly consistent with what we've seen from him on tape and what his history is and the reason they drafted him. It was kind of a simple little in route and he just happened to be open and Russ kind of avoided the rush and hit him and he dove into the end zone. He's more of the guy that takes the 7-yard in breaking route and takes it the distance or puts a move on you and gets open deep and hits the home run. So I think that's tip of the iceberg with him. But speaking of not seeing very much and we have to talk about Rashad Penny, don't we?
Do we?
I mean, 11 carries for 35 yards isn't like, or I think that was it. But there were signs, there were glimpses for the first time since maybe the game at Philly before he got hurt. There were signs.
Then also there was that catch when he caught the ball kind of on a. It wasn't quite a screen because he went outside and then came back in and and then took it up and then cut it around and just outran guys to the outside on the far side of the field and it's like, hey, there's that speed we remember from forever ago and all of that. It's just, where has that been for the last 4 years? He can't get on the field. He finally did. It was nice to see him get in there. So
and there was another run early. I think it was maybe the second or third drive. It was maybe a 7-yard gain. It was a little toss to the outside. He beat the guy to the edge. He put a little move on a guy, and then he put his shoulder down and gained another 2 yards on the sideline. And look, I've always, I'm on record as saying that for all the criticism when the draft pick was made before he even saw the field as a Seahawk, I understood the logic of that pick at that time and what they were looking for. And I also really liked the college tape. And then we saw those glimpses at LA in that one game, at Philly in that other game. We've seen those flashes. It's not like dude can't play in the NFL. He just can't stay healthy. I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that he's not a Seahawk in 2022.
That's gonna disappoint a lot of people.
I know his contract's up, but he's not. What kind of market's he going to have?
He's not going to have one.
If he were to stay healthy these last 6 games and do what he did yesterday and have some 70, 80-yard games and a couple of plays, I mean, if it doesn't cost him anything to bring him back, don't you think they're going to want to try one more time, maybe to squeeze some of that water out of that rock? You kind of might as well if you can sign him for a vet man. So if he. He gets hurt and doesn't play, you're not out anything. He just sits on be a 1-year
IR
deal
for the year. But the talent's there. That's the thing with him. The talent is there. It's obviously there. He just has to stay healthy so they can use it.
And I'm not talking about him being the guy. Like if anyone's listening to this and they go, whatever. But and I'm not even talking about you. If you want to fix this team. And I don't want to start this discussion yet, but if you want to fix this team for 2022, Carroll's already said we're going to fix Chris Carson's neck. He's going to come back stronger than ever. You can't count either of those guys.
No, you can't.
You still have to go out and acquire a guy, like the guy. And then you hope that if Chris Carson comes back healthy, he can contribute in some way as a part-time player. But if you can bring Penny back for, like you said, the vet minimum on a 1-year deal, maybe some incentives involved and be your third guy, because he's also showing other parts of his game. Like he had a key block yesterday.
He had a couple of really nice blitz pickups. Yeah. That was supposed to be a weakness in his game a couple of years ago. But he had a couple of ones that were just stellar and really mattered as far as the outcome of the game.
Pete talked about the impact that Adrian Peterson had this week, just in the locker room, just his presence and his awareness of where he is in his career right now and his ability or his willingness to share his experiences and his knowledge with other players. And I was so upset when I saw he was out there at the beginning. Like, how in the world can a guy walk in on a Wednesday that's 36 years old, that clearly has lost 2 steps, not just the proverbial step, and be your bell cow back to start a game? I think they were trying to send a message, because to see that Rashad Penny was healthy, that was the thing. When he came in on the 3rd drive, I think I was like, well, wait a minute. If he was healthy, then why wasn't he starting? I think that was maybe his last message he's going to get, and he needs to respond now if he holds out any hope of coming back.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, I was also, when he started, I was like, I mean, seriously, you don't have other guys. Like, there's a guy in the practice squad, Johnson. I want to see him up. I want to see him get touches. I want to figure out what he's got. He looked good in the preseason. We know he's got fantastic hands. So he's good at catching the ball out of the backfield. Yeah. Get him up here, get him some touches. This is a lost season. Why are you giving all these touches to a 36-year-old guy in a 7th team and all of that? But if that was what was needed to light a fire under Penny, if that's if Peterson coming in just to be a stabilizing force and to give some confidence and everything to the other guys around him, and to say something to the defense or to the offensive line, okay, go for it. But you can't continue to run this out week after week after week for the rest of the season. I have no problem with them coming in and doing this for a game or two and having it be a learning experience for everyone. But if you're given the bulk of your running back snaps to Adrian Peterson for the rest of this year, I think there's a missed opportunity to go see what Johnson has, to see if Penny's worth that even a veteran minimum deal for next year. Because I mean, Peterson, he's got all that experience and everything, but it was pretty clear watching him run, he doesn't have much left. No. Like the tank's empty with him as a running back. So I'm all for playing the kids. Play someone who's hungry.
Well, and that's what I referenced earlier was Josh Johnson. I obviously we love what we saw from him in the preseason, and his 2019 college tape was outstanding. Like, he might have been a day 2 pick. He was really, really good his junior year, and or was it his sophomore year? I can't remember if he came out early or not, but he looked really good. He fits the mold of a Seahawks, running back, and maybe he just hasn't shown anything, because they've been willing to play young running backs before, especially when there's injuries. But even, DJ Dallas, it's a good thing they won that game, because if they had lost that game, especially if they had looked on offense the way they've looked for the last 4 weeks, that's what I would have been screaming about today. Why the hell was a guy who's clearly washed up? The Titans gave up on him after 3 weeks, and they have a much healthier running game than we do and a much better offensive line.
Yeah. And they lost, their superstar running back in, Derrick Henry, and they were like, yeah, we don't need Peterson.
Oh, but guess what? After they cut him, they've played their 2 young guys that none of us have ever heard of, that were all unsigned rookies, and they've looked really effective. And so you're right. And again, part of me, they're not going to make a run out of this season. The whole let's go 5-0 to finish and finish 9-8, sneak into the playoffs. That's fun to think about, but does anyone really think that's going to amount to much?
I still don't see them beating the Rams.
No,
come on, right?
And honestly, the way that they've played on offense, are any of us confident enough that yesterday was so good that we can be that confident that they're going to sweep the Lions and Bears at home? Like, they should.
They better.
but I'm not putting my hard-earned money on it, right? So, especially with the elements and everything else. But it's Lions, I would like to see some of the young running backs play. Absolutely.
I would really like to see them, pick up Lions, Bears, Texans. They need to win those 3. Just straight up. The other 2, the Rams the Rams and Cardinals. Yeah. We'll see what happens in those 2, but they better go get those against the bad teams.
Well, and here's the thing, and that's why, whether or not there's any outside chance, and apparently there's a 3% one of them making the playoffs. That's what the stat guys say. It's going to come down to that game. at the Rams. But
Mhm.
because I think the Cardinals by week 18 are going to have everything locked up.
They might, and then
Right? You're not
they're
going to
playing backups.
You're not going to be facing Kyler Murray. You're not going to be facing James Conner. So we'll see.
then
The question becomes
on without Kyler
Right.
Murray and without Nuke Hopkins. Seattle got the score ran up on them against that team anyway. So it's
for whatever reason though, we play better down there than we do against them at home. I don't know what that is, but
I don't know.
But then that begs the question this. So let's say they go 4-1 down the stretch, right? There's 5 games left.
Yeah.
Then they would finish 8 and
8-9.
The new math is so weird. I'm still not used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Does everything stay status quo? There was the report this week on Pro Football Talk that Jody Allen, who we haven't gotten any feel for since she's took over for Paul Allen after he passed away, of how involved she is, how upset she is about this season. There was a report that she's not happy, that she's very involved, and that she doesn't think it's a one-year blip on the radar, that there are issues with this team that extend beyond just one bad season. If they go 4-1 to finish, does everything just stay status quo?
I don't know. I don't think it can. I mean, I think because you look at your superstar quarterback and he's been playing pretty poor until this week's game. Since coming back from his injury, he's been a big part of the problem. He has not played well, but he's also getting pressured just before he can even finish his drop. He's getting the ball out quick, and it's still not mattering because he's still getting hit. And at some point, he's gonna either like, okay, we change a bunch of stuff, or I'm out, because I think we kind of saw that at the beginning of it this last year. He is not going to sit back and wait this out and think that it's going to work. Yeah. So either they fixed it, which they didn't, even with the Gabe Jackson trade, or he's going to want changes. And if they're not willing to make those changes, he's going to be the change. And at that point, you're in a rebuild. There's nothing on this team that you can build around except for maybe DK Metcalf. And so you're in a complete rebuild. And at that point, you might as well rebuild the coaching staff and everything and just start over, because you got a 70-year-old coach who'll be 71 next year. Do you really want to start a rebuild with a 71-year-old coach?
There's so many moving parts to it, and obviously the record on the field this year has sparked some of this conversation. You and I and Bill had the conversation many times at the beginning of the year, and I know we talked about it on our pregame show or preseason show, that they thought the Carroll Wilson, we thought that relationship could be fixed long term, but if things went off the rails this season, it was all going to blow up and get ugly. Well, things have kind of gone off the rail. So look, I've given up trying to figure out what Pete Carroll is thinking. I honestly think he might truly believe that he can coach till he's 80. And I did think that earlier this year, even just a couple of weeks ago, when things were really bad, I thought his tone was different. I thought his body language was different. He seemed tired. He didn't sound to me like a guy that would be interested in going through another rebuild, especially given that if he does think he has 4 or 5 years left in him, that also gives him the opportunity to pursue another challenge if he doesn't think this is the right place. But God dang it, yesterday was so fun, and listening to him, seeing the speech he gave in the locker room at the end, listening to his coach's show today. Oh, he sounds like old Pete. He sounds energized again. And I could see that going either way. He might say, hey, if you're thinking about trading Russell Wilson, first of all, buck stops with me. I decide whether that happens or not. Second of all, I don't want to go through that again and try and find another quarterback. Or I could see him saying, yeah, that sounds exciting. Let's try it one more time. Let's try rebuilding this one more time. So I can't figure him out. Same with Russ. Yeah. We talked about his reported list, how accurate that might have been last year. Pretty much those teams have all made changes now that wouldn't jibe with what he was looking for. So I don't know that there are any matches if he were to want to demand a trade, I don't know that there are matches. I'm more inclined now than I was 4 weeks ago to think they might just run this thing back one more time, thinking, sure, we don't have a first round pick, but we have a second and some extra mid-round picks. We can add talent. Salary cap was just announced or it was reported that it's going to be announced in the next couple of days at 28.8 or 2088. So that's about a $26 million. There's going to be cap space.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be flexibility. Hey, it was just a 1 year thing. Russ was hurt for 3 games. We lost some close games. You know what I mean? See where I'm going with this? They can make a case that it's worth trying one more time.
Yeah. The reports of Jody Allen being unhappy and thinking this isn't just a 1 year blip and all of that. I mean, that's interesting, but at the same time, this has been the best era of Seahawk football by far, right? This is a team that has never had back-to-back 10-win seasons until Pete Carroll. And the 1 year they were 9-7, he was so upset he fired his whole coaching staff and started over. That gives you kind of the idea. Like it's just a thing. I think at this point, after a bad year, I mean, they won 12 games last year. So after one bad year, he's gone if he decides to go. I don't think that he's on any kind of hot seat or anything like that. 2 bad years in a row. Okay, then we might be talking. But one off year. Sorry, I know people are not going to like to hear that, but I think he only goes if he wants to.
I think one off year energizes that dude more than anything else, and makes him want to work even harder. Here's the caveat. In my opinion, the only thing that might cause significant change, because that Jody Allen report, to me, it didn't have a lot of teeth to it, didn't have a lot of substance. There were no unnamed sources that were quoted on the record. It was a lot of kind of general conjecture and speculation.
No, it's Mike Florio for you,
right? In the middle of a 4-game losing streak when people are upset. So, because I do feel like in the last few weeks in his post-game comments, even with the finger being an easy excuse, I feel like Carroll has been much more willing the last few weeks to throw Russ under the bus a little bit and say, hey, he should have looked for this. He didn't see this. He should have been better about this. If Pete himself at the end of the season feels like, hey, maybe it's time to pursue another answer at quarterback, then that's where the change would come from. That's where it come from. I don't know. I can't predict that because that relationship is so complicated. There are times when you listen to Pete talk and you think he's not happy with Russ. And so, a lot of this it could all boil down to the exit interview at the end of the year, right? What I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall when Russ comes into his office at the end of the year before going home or to San Diego, wherever he goes in the offseason, and listen to what Pete says to him. Because if he looks Russ in the eye and says, you need to get better, then I think Russ is going to call his agent right away.
Yeah, I could see that too. The other thing is if he looks Russ in the eye and says, you need to get better, Russ calls his agent and says, I don't want to deal with this. Does Jody Allen step in and be like, okay, if this isn't going to work, we're going to side with Russ?
Yeah, we don't know.
That's what I would be interested in. Bill brought up this a week ago. One of the teams that has been talked about as a potential landing spot if Russ got traded would be the Jets. And that if they could get Zach Wilson and what is currently the number 4 and 6 pick in the draft,
right? Get our pick back. It'd be kind of a draft day.
Yeah, get our pick back and
get Sonny Weaver on the phone.
So you'd have two top 10 picks and a guy in Zach Wilson that at least a year ago everyone thought had the talent to play in this league. Would that be enticing? And I was just like, no. It's not enough, but
it just doesn't make sense from the Jets standpoint. Like you're starting over with a rookie head coach and they have so many needs, if they were a quarterback away, and that's why the teams that made sense last year don't make sense anymore. Miami made sense, but Tua's playing really well. Philly doesn't make sense. Like I think they believe in Jalen Hurts and The one team that I think we all agree that that was on the list last year, or one of the two that was reported, that would make all the sense in the world is New Orleans. I think Sean Payton might be the perfect coach for him. I think he has stated, or through his, channels or whatever in those reports, we heard that he was intrigued by the idea of playing for Sean Payton, but the Saints have no cap flexibility.
Yeah.
And so, for them to make it happen, they'd have to get rid of so many guys that they would ultimately make the destination less interesting to Russ. So I don't think
the other one.
I just don't think there's an easy one. The Giants, maybe.
The other one would be Denver, actually.
I've heard that.
Because they've got the defense, they're doing all right with Teddy Bridgewater, and Russ would be a massive upgrade there. They've got a running game, like they've got
great
some
skill
weapons.
Position guys, skill position weapons.
If he was willing to go play, and if that was added to his list, they could want that, but they don't have what Seattle would need to pry.
No, and he would probably, I could see the appeal, even though John Elway doesn't run the day-to-day operations there anymore. He's still involved, and I can see that, him being a recruiter. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like a match. So I don't know, because and we're going to go through this for the next 8 months so many times, because it is pretty easy to talk yourself into thinking why the Seahawks would consider it, because after this next off season, does he have 3 years left on his deal or just 2?
He's got 3.
Okay. So maybe not. I was going to say after this next off season, his value might be higher than it ever is going to be. Because once you get to where you only have a year left on your deal, you're not going to get as much in return. But I think yesterday's game was significant in that it showed that the guys are still playing hard. The coaches are putting good game plans together. They beat a quality opponent and kind of beat them in all three phases of the game. I think they're going to play well enough the rest of this year that it's going to make an easy decision to just kind of bring everything back again next year.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So, before we go off here, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone where they can find you, plug your show, all of that stuff.
So it's the Emerald City Sportscast. You can find it on all the podcast platforms, Spotify and Apple, iTunes, or whatever it's called now, on Apple and Stitcher and Podbean and all those. And I will get back into it. I've been on hiatus the last 5 weeks or so. Work's been kicking my butt, but I also caught that non-COVID thing that's been going around that wrecked my voice and made me sick for about a month. So, but because of that, there's a lot to talk about. And on that show, I don't just focus on the Seahawks, talk about the Mariners, even though they're in a lockout right now. There's lots to talk about, and some movement that was made by them, some coaching moves with the Huskies and Cougs, and throughout the Pac-12, including today down in Oregon. So we'll be touching on a lot of that stuff. And then as soon as we get into the off season, it'll be time to have you and Bill back on, and we'll start to talk about all this stuff in greater detail. So on Twitter, I am Seahawks Forever. You can follow me there as well. And on YouTube, just look for the Emerald City Sportscast. All the shows end up there, and some other bonus content as well.
Cool. And so you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Myers NFL. Bill, who's not here, but we'll be back soon, is at NWCHawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. You can find us at SeahawksPlaybook.com and on every sports podcast app that's ever been out there. And with that, until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWCHawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.